Deep under the ocean, surrounded by enemies, one mistake could mean the end of the world. During the Cold War, submariners lived at the very edge of human endurance, sealed inside steel tubes that roamed the oceans with enough firepower to destroy entire nations. To the outside world, these machines looked like silent hunters, unstoppable and invisible. But to the men inside, life was claustrophobic, dangerous, and endlessly stressful. Imagine spending months without sunlight, breathing recycled air, and sleeping in a bunk still warm from the man who used it before you. Every sound mattered: the hum of machinery, the distant ping of sonar, the creak of the hull as it groaned under pressure. Any mistake, a wrong move on the controls, a reactor malfunction, even a fire in the galley could spiral into disaster in seconds. In this video, we'll uncover why it sucked to be a submariner in the Cold War, from the nuclear shadow that hung over every patrol to the daily hardships of life beneath the waves. Life aboard a Cold War submarine was nothing like the sleek, heroic image shown in recruiting posters. Inside, it was a world of cramped steel corridors, dim lighting, and no real privacy. Space was so limited that most crewmen didn't even have their own bunks. They practiced what was called hot bunking, 3 men sharing 2 beds, rotating with their shifts, sliding into a mattress still warm from the last sleeper. The air was another constant reminder that this was no ordinary life. With no windows and no fresh breeze, the crew relied on filters, scrubbers, and chemicals to keep the atmosphere barely breathable. After weeks underwater, the smell of machinery, sweat, and recycled air clung to everything. Even food carried the taste of confinement: canned goods, powdered eggs, and meals that grew duller with each passing day. Noise was everywhere: the thrum of engines, the constant whine of pumps, the distant echo of sonar pings. It was an environment that never truly went silent. For submariners, learning to sleep through the mechanical heartbeat of the boat was as essential as any skill. Isolation made it worse. Once a patrol began, there was no sunlight, no fresh air, no letters from home. Weeks turned into months, and the crew lived their entire lives inside a narrow steel tube with no escape. The outside world might be at peace, or on the brink of nuclear war. They had no way of knowing. For the men aboard, this was normal. They laughed, worked, and endured in conditions most people today would find unlivable. Because once the hatch closed and the submarine slipped beneath the waves, there was no way out until the mission was over. Every Cold War submariner lived under the same unspoken truth: their boat carried enough firepower to end civilization. Beneath the deck sat rows of ballistic missiles, each tipped with nuclear warheads powerful enough to erase entire cities. A single submarine on patrol could unleash more destruction than all of World War II combined. This was the logic of the age: mutually assured destruction, or MAD. The mission of a ballistic missile submarine wasn't to fight battles, but to act as the ultimate deterrent. Their very existence promised that if one side launched a nuclear strike, the other would respond with equal force, ensuring no one could ever win. For the crew, that meant living with unimaginable pressure. They trained constantly for the moment when an order might come through the radio: open the missile hatches, turn keys, and launch. The thought haunted them, knowing they could be asked to push the button even if their families, their homes, and their entire nation had already been destroyed. Unlike surface ships, a submarine in wartime couldn't simply retreat. If nuclear war broke out, many submariners assumed they would never return to port. Their role was to stay hidden, strike if ordered, and possibly vanish in the chaos that followed. It was a strange mix of pride and dread. Pride in being part of an elite crew trusted with humanity's most powerful weapons. Dread in knowing that if those weapons were ever used, they would be instruments of the world's final war. Every dive beneath the waves carried that nuclear shadow, a constant reminder that their steel tube wasn't just a submarine, but a doomsday machine waiting for the signal. Beneath the oceans, the Cold War played out as a silent cat-and-mouse game. American and Soviet submarines hunted one another across the deep, each trying to track, shadow, or evade without giving away their own position. It was a world defined by sound: the faint echo of a propeller, the ping of active sonar, the subtle hum of machinery. Because in the depths, a single noise could reveal everything. Submariners described it as a high-stakes duel of patience. Crews strained to hear the faintest clue of an enemy sub while keeping their own vessel as quiet as possible. Sometimes they would trail a rival for days, staying just out of range, waiting for the perfect moment to gather intelligence or practice a simulated attack. Other times, they would dive into thermal layers of the ocean, hoping shifting currents would hide them from sonar. But mistakes happened. Collisions and near misses were far more common than the public realized. US and Soviet submarines scraped holes in the dark, rammed each other by accident, and in some cases never resurfaced. The Soviet K-129 mysteriously sank in 1968, lost with all hands. The American USS Scorpion vanished the same year under equally mysterious circumstances. Each disaster fueled suspicion and paranoia, with both sides wondering if the other had been involved. For the men on board, the danger was constant. One wrong maneuver could turn a silent patrol into a disaster, and yet the missions never stopped. Every deployment meant slipping beneath the waves once again, entering a deadly game where no one could afford to make a sound. It was chess played in the dark, except the pieces were nuclear submarines and the stakes were nothing less than survival. Beyond the nuclear tension and silent duels, everyday life aboard a Cold War submarine was its own form of endurance test. Food was one of the first hardships. On departure, the galley might be stocked with some fresh bread, fruit, and vegetables, but within days, those were gone. From then on, meals meant canned goods, powdered eggs, freeze-dried stews, and reconstituted milk. By the third or fourth week, everything tasted of metal and monotony. Air quality was another constant struggle. Older diesel submarines carried the stink of fuel and exhaust, mixed with the damp odor of machinery. Even on nuclear boats, the air was recycled endlessly. Carbon dioxide levels crept up, and chemical fresheners were used to mask the staleness. To a newcomer, the atmosphere felt heavy and artificial, a reminder that they were breathing inside a sealed tube miles below the surface. Hygiene offered little relief. Water was precious, so showers were rare and rationed. Some submarines allowed only seconds of running water per wash, while others required Navy showers. Quick rinse, soap while the water is off, then another rinse. Constant dampness meant clothes rarely felt truly clean, and mold and mildew were common in the corners of the ship. Then there was the boredom. Patrols stretched for weeks or even months with little change in scenery, just steel walls and the same faces. Submariners followed strict routines of watches, drills, and maintenance. Mail from home was impossible, and radios stayed mostly silent to preserve secrecy. Loneliness sank in, amplified by the knowledge that the ocean separated them completely from family and friends. It was a lifestyle of constant discomfort. The food was dull, the air stale, the water scarce, and the days repetitive. Yet crews endured it, knowing these daily hardships were simply the price of living and working inside the world's most unforgiving environment. Life on a Cold War submarine meant living with constant danger, even when no enemy was nearby. The ocean itself was always the greatest threat. A fire in the confined space of a submarine could spread in seconds, filling compartments with smoke and leaving nowhere to escape. Flooding was just as deadly. One leak under pressure could turn a narrow corridor into a death trap. Then there were the reactors. Nuclear-powered submarines extended patrols and gave navies true global reach, but they carried enormous risks. Soviet subs in particular suffered several serious reactor accidents. The K-19, later nicknamed the Widowmaker, experienced a coolant system failure that nearly caused a full nuclear meltdown. Crew members sacrificed their lives trying to patch the system, absorbing lethal doses of radiation to save their ship. Incidents like these haunted submariners, a reminder that their vessel was both a weapon and a ticking hazard. The United States was not immune either. The USS Thresher was lost in 1963 during a deep diving test, likely from a mechanical failure that led to catastrophic flooding. Just 5 years later, the USS Scorpion mysteriously disappeared in the Atlantic with all 99 crew aboard. Both tragedies sent shockwaves through the Navy and reminded the world how unforgiving the deep ocean could be. Even training exercises carried fatal risks. Simple equipment failures, human error, or unexpected conditions could turn a drill into disaster. Submariners knew that once the hatch closed and the boat submerged, help was virtually impossible to reach them in time. Every patrol carried that weight. Fire, flood, radiation, or mechanical failure, any of them could strike without warning. To live underwater for weeks was to accept that danger as part of daily life, knowing that survival depended on skill, discipline, and more than a little luck. If the physical dangers weren't enough, the psychological toll of serving on a Cold War submarine was just as punishing. Claustrophobia was inescapable. Every space was narrow, every ceiling low, every bunk crammed next to pipes and machinery. For months, there was no horizon, no sky, no sense of openness. Some men adapted, but for others, the confinement gnawed at them day after day. Sleep was another challenge. Crews lived by a strict rhythm of 6-hour watch cycles, 6 hours on duty, 12 hours off, then back again. But off duty didn't always mean rest. drills, maintenance, or noise from the boat often cut into precious sleep. With no natural day or night, many submariners lost track of time entirely, their bodies struggling against the artificial routine of life under the sea. Stealth missions added even greater strain. At times, the order went out: maintain absolute silence, no drop tools, no loud conversation, no unnecessary movement. The entire crew tiptoed through their routines, knowing that the smallest sound could betray their position. Sitting in that tense quiet, listening for sonar pings, was enough to set nerves on edge. And always, there was the knowledge of what a single sonar ping could mean. If detected by an enemy, the submarine might be tracked, cornered, and destroyed before it could escape. Submariners carried that fear constantly, a weight pressing on every decision, every maneuver. The result was an invisible burden: stress, fatigue, and the mental strain of knowing that survival depended not only on their skill, but on silence, secrecy, and the hope that the enemy never found them. Serving on a Cold War submarine was as much a battle of the mind as it was a test of machines. For all the danger, discomfort, and stress, men still lined up to serve beneath the waves. Submariners were considered elite, a cut above the average sailor, and they took pride in carrying one of the Navy's most demanding assignments. Training was tough, the standards high, but those who earned their place knew they were part of a small, respected brotherhood. There were practical rewards too. Pay for submariners was higher, a recognition of the risks they accepted every time the hatch sealed shut. Within the Navy, the Dolphin's badge of a qualified submariner carried prestige. It marked someone who had mastered every system aboard and could be trusted when lives depended on it. But more than money or status, there was the sense of mission. Submariners understood that they weren't just crewing another ship, they were the ultimate deterrent. Their patrols, invisible and unannounced, formed a silent shield that kept global war in check. Knowing that their boat might prevent nuclear catastrophe gave their sacrifices meaning. And then there was the crew itself. Living in such tight quarters through monotony, danger, and exhaustion forged bonds stronger than steel. Many submariners later said that what kept them going wasn't the mission or the pay, but the men beside them. In the end, they endured the claustrophobia, the long patrols, and the nuclear shadow because they believed in what they were doing and because they refused to let their shipmates down. For Cold War submariners, every patrol meant trading comfort and sometimes safety for the fate of the world. They endured the cramped bunks, the stale air, the endless noise, and the constant shadow of nuclear war, all while sealed inside a steel tube beneath the ocean. Their lives were proof that sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought on the surface, but in the silence below. Could you handle months underwater in total silence, cut off from sunlight and family, with danger lurking just beyond the hull? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden world of submariners, make sure to subscribe for more military archive breakdowns. More stories of machines, men, and the extremes of history are coming soon.